guys, today we are starting a new chapter, chapter 11, and it's the main concept of it is using relationships to make predictions. So we're going to learn how to use relationships between variables to make these predictions. And we are going to start off this chapter with exploring what it takes to build a better baseball team. And I'm going to introduce to you the predicted winning percentage formula along with the concept of residual and what residuals tell us. Okay? So, we will, like I said, we're going to start with exploring what it takes to build a better baseball team. The ultimate goal of every team, no matter what sport it is to win games. Some teams win more games than others. Since scoring more runs than your opponent is the key to winning games in baseball, it makes sense to investigate the relationship between runs scored, runs allowed, and winning percentage. And that introduces this predicted winning percentage formula, which was used by one of the most famous sabermetricians, which is someone who uses statistics to analyze baseball, Bill James, and he proposed this Pythagorean expected winning percentage formula. So the formula is runs scored squared divided by runs scored squared plus runs allowed squared. And like I mentioned, our S stands for runs scored, and RA represent runs allowed. So he created a formula using these two variables to help predict a team's winning percentage. So consider the statistics for the 2008 Detroit Tigers, who scored 821 runs and allowed 857. Calculate the Pythagorean predicted winning percentage. Okay, so my predicted winning percentage is going to be my runs scored, which was 821 squared, divided by runs scored squared plus runs allowed squared. So I took those two numbers and substituted them in their appropriate spots in the formula. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my calculator. So remember, it's going to give us their winning percentage. If you want to plug this in your calculator all at once, that's fine. Just make sure you put parentheses around your denominator. Okay? So 821, and you can use the little squared key off to the left. Don't forget to put parentheses around your entire denominator. And you should get about 0.479. Like I said, if you didn't get that, double check to make sure you typed it into your calculator correctly and to make sure you use parentheses around your denominator. Show it one more time. So, based on this season and the Tigers scoring 821 runs and allowing 857, Bill James is predicting using his formula that they'll win about close to 48% of their games. So find the predicted number of wins knowing that they play 162 games in their season. Okay, well, they're predicted to win about 47.9% of those. So it's going to be 0.479 times 162. Type that in my calculator. And you get about 77.58. Equals 77.58, or I'm sorry, 0.598. Or we can just go ahead and round that to about 78 games, or 78 wins. Based on this formula, that's how many we predict they're going to win during this season. Now, the Tigers actually won 74 games this season. How does this compare to our prediction? Remember, this is our prediction right here, the 78. Well, this is 4 games fewer than what our model predicted. Now, there's a term for this difference between these two values. The difference between the actual number of wins and predicted number of wins is called the residual. So the formula for residual is actual value minus the predicted value. Okay, so I think you should highlight that. You'll definitely use that more in this chapter and tonight in your homework. So, when a residual is positive, that means the actual value is greater than the predicted value, right? In order to get the positive number, this number would have to be greater than this one. When a residual is negative, the actual value is actually less than the predicted, so your prediction's greater. Thus, your prediction was too high. So the residual for the 2008 Tigers, remember it's actual. What actually happened to the Tigers? They won 74 games. Minus what was predicted to happen. It was predicted they would win 78. So the residual here was -4. So since the residual was negative, they performed below the prediction based on Bill James's formula. They won about 4 fewer games than predicted. Okay? So ideally, if our predictions are really good, we'd get residuals close to 0, because then the difference between the actual and the predicted value would be 0. And that's what we want, right? We want our predictions to be right on what the actual values are. So we want residuals to be as close to 0 as possible. Now, sabermetricians often attribute these residuals to luck, or in statistical terms, random chance. So they're saying the only reason why this residual isn't 0 is because, the Tigers lost some games that they should have won. They went into extra innings, there was errors made. So that's the reason behind that, or else the residual should have been closer to 0 here, because it's just, I'm sure some of you at one point or the other, if you've played sports, like I said, you lost some games that you should have won, okay? So although some argue that the ability to win close games helps explain the size of the residuals as well. Okay, let's go to the your turn. If you want, you can pause the video here, or you can work through this example with me. So it says, this time, consider the statistics for the world champion Phillies, who scored 799 runs and allowed 680. They actually won 92 games this season. Calculate the Pythagorean predicted winning percentage. Okay, so if you need to, you can rewrite the formula right here. Just keep in mind, it was runs scored squared divided by runs scored squared plus runs allowed squared. So, plug in the data for the Phillies. Remember when you type this into your calculator, you need to put parentheses around your denominator. So you should get about a 58% for the predicted winning percentage. So now, remember, they play 162 games, so 0.58. So what's 58% of 162? And you get 93.96, so we'll just round that accordingly, or about 94 games or wins. So find the residual. Remember, the formula for residual is the actual value minus the predicted. So up here it says they actually won 92 games. They are predicted to win 94. So it's a difference of 2. Or I'm sorry, negative 2. So interpret this residual. What does this mean? It means in 2008, the Phillies won 2 fewer games than predicted because their residual was negative, so that means their actual was less than their predicted. So the Phillies won 2 fewer games than predicted based on, now this prediction for number of games won was based on what variables? Well, it was based on their runs scored and runs allowed. Right here from this formula, runs scored, runs allowed. Okay? You're going to have to interpret a few times in your homework. So make sure if you want, you can highlight this. But make sure that helps us understand, what does a residual really mean? What is that negative 2 really telling us? So is there a better model? Why did Bill James choose 2 as the exponent? Here's a more general formula for predicted winning percentage, which still uses run scores and runs allowed. But this time, there's a variable in for the exponent. So we don't know what that exponent is, so we're just going to call it x. Okay? Now we can try different values for the exponent to see which one works best. So we're going to use that same data from the Detroit Tigers, who scored 821 runs and allowed 857. And remember, for that first example, our residual is negative 4. We're going to see if we can get that residual any closer to 0 by using a different exponent. So I'm going to recalculate their predicted winning percentage, but this time using an exponent of 1. Remember to put parentheses around your denominator when you type it into your calculator. I'll show you how I'm typing this in. So I get a winning percentage of about 0.489 or 48.9%. Now, predict the number of games they won in the 2008 season. Remember, you guys, what it doesn't say is just recall that they play 162 games. I think they were just expecting you to remember that from above. So recall that they played 162 games total. So that would be 0.489 times 162. That gives me 79.218. Or we'll say about 79 games. Find and interpret the residual. Recall that they won 74 games. So remember, your residual is actual minus predicted. So they actually won 74 games. And this time we predicted that they'd win 79. So the residual was -5 this time. So what does this -5 tell us? It tells us in 2008, the Tigers won 5 fewer games than predicted. And then don't forget to tell me what this prediction was based on. This prediction was based on runs scored and runs allowed. Okay? So you're doing this a few times in your homework, so make sure you understand how to find a residual and how to interpret it. If it was a +5, instead you would say in 2008 the Tigers won 5 more games than predicted based on their runs scored and runs allowed. So for the Tigers, which exponent appears to be better? The one from the front where we use an exponent of 2, or this one where we use an exponent of 1, and why? Well, hopefully you're saying when we use an exponent of 2 because the residual is closer to 0, which means our actual value is closer to our prediction, or our prediction is closer to our actual, however you want to say it. So x equals 2, since the residual, the value of the residual is closer to 0. Therefore, our prediction is closer to the actual value. So, to decide if the exponent 2 is really the better exponent, we would need to look at the residuals for all teams. So although the exponent of 2 was better for the Tigers in this case, what about the Phillies? What about the White Sox? What about the Red Sox? What about the Yankees? Okay, so we'd want to take into account all the teams in Major League Baseball. And we'd compare their, take into account everyone's residual for each exponent. And we'd use what is called the sum of squared residuals, which is one way to measure how well a model makes predictions. Now, you do not need to know this formula, but the sum of squared residuals is the sum, that's what this sigma means, sum, of the actual value minus the predicted values squared. Okay, sum of squared, and then that's the residuals. Okay, so the reason why we square everything is because if we don't square these values, if the White Sox had a residual of -5 and the Yankees had a residual of +5, then those residuals would balance each other out of 0, making you think that your predictions and your actual values were right on when they weren't. So this way we square the values, and that's the reason why we square a lot of numbers in statistics, because we're dealing with positive and negatives, and we don't want it to assume that our number is low when it's really not, or our predictions are close when they're really not. If a model makes good predictions, the difference between the actual and predicted values will be small, resulting in a small sum of squared residuals. Okay, so remember, we still want those numbers to be hopefully like -2, +1, maybe even 0, okay? because then when we square them and add them up, we're going to get a small sum. So let's say that with an exponent of 2, the sum of squared residuals for all 2008 teams was 529. However, with an exponent of 1, the sum of squared residuals for all 2008 teams was 1,215. Which exponent is better and why? Well, it would be an exponent of 2 because it has a smaller sum of squared residuals. And if the sum's smaller, that meant each individual residual was smaller, therefore resulting in residuals that were close to 0, therefore predictions that were close to the actual values. Okay? So make sure you keep your notes out next to you to work on your homework, and good luck, guys.